All right, listening 4.0, getting out of our own way. So many of us want to listen empathetically, or at least we know we should, right? But there's things that we do that actually get in our way and prevent us from listening effectively. What are they? So 3 broad categories. Number 1 is avoidance. Number 2 is our listening filters. And number 3, unhelpful habits. So let's start with avoidance. So a guy comes into your shed or into your community group, wherever you are. You know he's been struggling, but not really sure with what. He doesn't look very good. And you think, I got so much I want to do. I don't want to get bogged down in a conversation. And so your strategy is, well, you just say, how's it going, all right? And then you go off and get on with your day. And meanwhile, this guy could be struggling, but you really have no idea. I just had this thing the other day where a very friendly, funny, kind of out there sort of neighbor, he just wasn't looking so good. And my wife just asked him how he was doing, and he was sharing about that he might actually be losing a newborn grandchild. I mean, it's a terrible tragedy. And you never would know if my wife hadn't actually sat there and asked him and stood there to listen. So why do we avoid people? Well, I think a lot of men avoid conversations because they fear they won't have time. They fear that they won't know what to do, right? Like, what if some guy tells me a bunch of problems? How do I handle this, right? And they fear an outpouring of emotion. Again, what do I do if someone gets very emotional? And the thing is that there's really nothing to do with any of that. It's just to listen and just to nod and listen and not let our fear get in the way. A friend of mine, very brave and very compassionate friend of mine, he is a very smart guy, and he does a lot of project work on mining sites. And he was up on a site and noticed a guy was, noticed in the crib room, where the people gather to have their tea, there's a guy who was always on his own and wasn't really part of the gang. And he asked about this guy with someone, and the person said to him, oh yeah, that guy, well, he lost his son. And and we named that room over there down the corridor after his son. And yeah, so he's a bit down. And so Tim was sort of nodding and kind of realizing what's going on. So as soon as he could, he sat down right beside this guy and said, hey, my name's Tim. How you going? I hear you had a bereavement recently. Do you want to talk about it? And that's the kind of guy Tim is. And the guy told him very, openly and honestly about having lost his son and how he was feeling. And then he said, you know what? You're the first person who's asked me how I'm doing and who's really talked to me since my son died. And it's got to the point where I could be walking down a corridor and I see someone coming the other way and they actually turn around to avoid me because they're so embarrassed. I don't think that's an ideal way of acting, and I don't think that's the way a lot of us really want to behave, but it is what we do. So consider where in your life who you're avoiding. The second thing that gets in our way of listening effectively are the listening filters. And neuroscience has shown us that we listen selectively. We cannot simply allow everything, all the messaging coming at us to get through because our brains can't handle it. So we have to focus on certain messages and discard others. And we will tend to discard messages that we're not interested in, people we don't like, people we're biased against, and we tend to focus on risk, danger, and people we like. So what are some of the filters that really get in the way of listening effectively when someone is speaking? Well, here's the list. So someone I could have a very strong opinion about, right? I may not listen to a particular politician because I don't like them. Judgments. There's people who don't live their life the way I think they should, so I judge them and I don't really listen to them very generously. Biases. Thoughts. We could be simply listening to our own thoughts instead of listening to what the other person is saying. Assessments. Interests. There are some people I'm just not interested in, and I just don't want to listen to them, right? People I may not like, and the surroundings I'm in may make it very difficult to listen. It could be very noisy or very distracting, or have people who I don't really trust hanging around. Where I struggle, the listening filter that gets in the way for me the most is I get lost in my thoughts. I think about all the things I haven't done that day and that I've got to do, and I just think about my calendar or my schedule, and I actually just get lost in that. And I'm not really paying any attention to what the person is trying to say. So consider, what is your listening filter? What gets in the way of you actually just being there and paying attention to someone? The third way that we get in our own way is unhelpful listening habits. Now, my wife accuses me, and I must say quite correctly, of being a serial interrupter. She's halfway through a sentence, and I'm right in there with my response. And I know I do it with other people as well, because I'm impatient. I've got all these ideas. I don't like what they're saying, and I want to correct them. I want to change them. But it's really not a good habit if I really am committed to listening to people. So what are some other unhelpful listening habits? Well, I can be really focused on my agenda. I'm more interested in pursuing my agenda. I've got my program for the day. These are the things I'm interested in, and I'm not really interested in listening to you. I could be really committed to giving advice and solutions and actually not listening to the person. Sometimes people just want to get something out. They don't want my advice. They want to solve the problem themselves. They just want me to listen. And it's the same thing with reassurance. Sometimes people can get emotional, and I find myself reaching for a tissue or trying to tut them on the shoulder, but that distracts them from actually saying what they want to say and experiencing what they need to experience. And so I'm actually robbing them of the chance to speak. Same thing with explaining. Sometimes people say, I've had this issue and this is the thing I want to do, and I start explaining to them why they're feeling this way, why this thing happened. They don't want my explanation. They just want me to listen. The worst thing for me is the one-upmanship, where I'm telling my story about the camping trip I had last weekend, for example, and then someone says, oh, yeah, well, I had this camping trip, and they tell me about their massive camper trailer and this amazing place they went to that's way, way better than the place I went to. And it's a put down. It means that my story just doesn't matter. And then, of course, there's interrupting. So I really invite you to consider, what are some of the unhelpful habits you engage in? Start getting conscious about them. Start becoming aware of where you might be reassuring or explaining or giving advice or interrupting, because it really affects the quality of your listening and the room that someone has to speak. So I hope these three ways that we get in our own way of avoiding listening filters and unhelpful habits has been helpful.